In a city where tradition and order reigned supreme, there existed an undercurrent of tension between the ruling class and those who felt oppressed by their authority. The royal guards, clad in their immaculate uniforms, were symbols of power and discipline. They patrolled the streets with unwavering confidence, ensuring peace and upholding the laws that governed the land. To many citizens, they represented protection. To others, they embodied oppression. Among these dissenters was Marcus, a man whose life had been shaped by hardship and resentment. Marcus wasn't born into privilege or wealth. He grew up on the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood often overlooked by the monarchy. His family struggled daily just to put food on the table, while the elite lived lavishly behind gilded gates. Over time, this disparity fueled a deep bitterness within him. He began blaming the royal guards for all his misfortunes, seeing them not as protectors but as enforcers of inequality. Every time he saw their polished armor glinting in the sunlight, it reminded him of everything he didn't have and everything he believed he deserved. For years, Marcus tried to find ways to undermine the guards' authority. At first, it was small acts of rebellion, spray painting graffiti on walls, spreading rumors about corruption, or organizing protests that fizzled out quickly. But none of these efforts made a dent in the system. Frustrated and desperate, Marcus decided it was time to take bolder action. He wanted something dramatic, something that would expose the guards as vulnerable and human, shattering the illusion of invincibility they projected. That's when he came up with his plan, a trained attack dog. If people saw one of the mighty royal guards fall victim to such primal aggression, surely it would shake their faith in the institution. It was risky, yes, but Marcus convinced himself it was worth it. After all, what better way to strike fear into the heart of authority than by using nature's raw power against it? To execute his scheme, Marcus acquired Brutus, a large, muscular dog bred specifically for strength and ferocity. From the moment he brought Brutus home, Marcus poured every ounce of his energy into training the animal. Day after day, he drilled commands into Brutus, teaching him to lunge, bite, and overpower anyone who dared stand in his path. The dog became an extension of Marcus's anger, a living weapon forged from months of relentless conditioning. By the time Brutus was ready, Marcus felt unstoppable. He envisioned the chaos, the shock on the guard's face, and the cheers of the crowd as they witnessed the downfall of the so-called untouchables. But as much as Marcus prepared, he failed to account for one crucial factor: the unpredictability of human connection. Little did he know that his grand plan would unravel in mere seconds, leaving him humiliated and questioning everything he thought he knew about power, loyalty, and control. What lay ahead was far beyond anything he could have imagined, a lesson that would change not only his life, but also the lives of those around him. Brutus was no ordinary dog. From the moment Marcus acquired him, it was clear that this animal was different, larger than most, with muscles rippling beneath his sleek coat and eyes that gleamed with an almost unnatural intensity. Marcus had chosen Brutus carefully, selecting him from a breeder known for producing dogs with unmatched strength and aggression. These weren't just random traits, they were qualities Marcus intended to harness and sharpen through rigorous training. To him, Brutus wasn't just a pet or companion. He was a weapon, finely tuned and ready to strike at a moment's notice. Every morning, Marcus would rise before dawn to work with Brutus. The first step was building trust, or at least the illusion of it. Marcus fed Brutus by hand, speaking in low, commanding tones to establish dominance. He taught the dog to recognize specific whistles and gestures, ensuring that Brutus responded instantly without hesitation. Over time, these commands became second nature to the animal. A sharp whistle meant charge, while a clenched fist signaled stop. Marcus drilled these actions repeatedly until Brutus could execute them flawlessly, even in chaotic environments. But physical obedience wasn't enough. Marcus needed Brutus to be fearless, capable of intimidating anyone who crossed their path. To achieve this, he exposed the dog to increasingly challenging scenarios. At first, it was simple tasks like chasing after objects or barking on command. But as Brutus grew stronger and more confident, Marcus introduced simulated attacks. He dressed in padded armor and encouraged Brutus to lunge at him, rewarding the dog with praise and treats whenever he succeeded. It was brutal work, but Marcus didn't care. Each growl, each snap of Brutus's powerful jaws brought him closer to his ultimate goal, creating the perfect attack dog. As weeks turned into months, Brutus transformed into a creature of raw power and instinct. His bark echoed like thunder, sending shivers down the spines of anyone who heard it. Strangers crossing paths with Marcus and Brutus would instinctively step aside, intimidated by the sheer size and presence of the beast. Even other dogs seemed to sense Brutus's dominance, cowering in his shadow. Marcus took immense pride in what he had created, often boasting to himself about how unstoppable they were together. In his mind, Brutus was invincible, a force of nature that nothing and no one could resist. Yet, despite all his efforts, Marcus failed to consider one critical aspect of Brutus's personality: intelligence. While Brutus had been trained to obey orders, he was also highly perceptive, capable of reading subtle cues and emotions in those around him. This trait made him adaptable, yes, but it also meant that Brutus wasn't merely a machine following commands. Deep down, he retained a spark of individuality, a capacity to think and feel beyond what Marcus had programmed into him. Unfortunately for Marcus, this nuance would soon prove to be his undoing. Unaware of the storm brewing beneath Brutus's disciplined exterior, Marcus continued preparing for his ambush. Every detail of the plan played out perfectly in his mind. He envisioned the chaos, the shock on the royal guard's face, and the cheers of onlookers as Brutus tore through their ranks. What Marcus didn't realize, however, was that true strength isn't always measured by brute force. Sometimes it lies in something far more profound: trust, respect, and the unbreakable bonds that form between living beings. And when the day finally came, Marcus would learn this lesson in the most unexpected way imaginable. The morning of the ambush dawned crisp and clear, with the sun casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of the marketplace. The air buzzed with activity as vendors set up their stalls, calling out to passers-by to admire their fresh produce, handcrafted goods, and colorful fabrics. Children darted between carts, laughing and chasing one another, while adults haggled over prices or paused to exchange gossip. It was a typical day in the bustling heart of the city, alive with energy and noise. But amid the chaos, Marcus lurked in the shadows, his eyes fixed on a group of royal guards making their way through the crowd. Leading the patrol was Captain Alaric, a figure who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with an air of quiet authority that seemed to silence even the rowdiest of troublemakers. His armor gleamed under the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting not just light, but also years of dedication to duty. Alaric wasn't just any guard. He was a man revered for his fairness, courage, and unwavering commitment to protecting the people. Though some resented the monarchy he served, few could deny the sincerity in his actions or the kindness in his gaze when he spoke to ordinary citizens. As Alaric moved through the marketplace, his presence brought a sense of calm. Vendors greeted him warmly, offering small smiles or nods of acknowledgement. Even the children paused their games to watch him pass, fascinated by the sword at his side and the emblem of the crown etched onto his breastplate. To many, he represented stability, a shield against the uncertainties of life. But to Marcus, Alaric was nothing more than a symbol of everything wrong with the world. Watching him now, so effortlessly admired and respected, only fueled Marcus's anger. This was the perfect moment to strike. From his hiding spot behind a stack of crates, Marcus tightened his grip on the leash attached to Brutus. The dog stood beside him, tense and alert, his muscles coiled like springs ready to explode into action. Marcus scanned the area one last time, ensuring no one would interfere. Satisfied that the timing was right, he leaned down and whispered harshly into Brutus's ear. "Remember your training," he hissed. Then, with a sharp whistle cutting through the hum of the marketplace, Marcus released the leash. Brutus shot forward like an arrow loosed from a bow, his powerful legs propelling him toward Alaric with terrifying speed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people scrambled to get out of the way, their laughter and chatter replaced by screams of panic. Mothers pulled their children close, shielding them from the sight of the massive beast barreling down on the unsuspecting captain. For a brief moment, it seemed as though all sound had been sucked out of the world, leaving only the thunderous pounding of Brutus's paws against the ground. Alaric, however, didn't flinch. Though everyone around him reacted with fear, he remained perfectly still, his posture calm yet commanding. He turned slightly to face the charging dog, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. But he didn't draw it. Instead, he watched Brutus approach, his expression unreadable but steady. To those watching, it seemed almost impossible that he could remain so composed in the face of such danger. Surely, this was the end, the moment when the untouchable royal guard would be brought to his knees by sheer brute force. But then something remarkable happened. Just as Brutus reached Alaric, the dog slowed and stopped. Instead of lunging or attacking, Brutus froze mid-stride, his ears twitching as if confused. The crowd held its collective breath, unsure of what would happen next. Would the dog suddenly snap out of it and fulfill Marcus's plan? Or was there something else at play here, something none of them could have predicted? All eyes were on Alaric, waiting to see how the seasoned captain would respond to this unexpected turn of events. As time passed, the city began to feel different, not just for Marcus and Brutus, but for everyone who had witnessed the events in the marketplace. The story of how a trained attack dog had turned into a symbol of trust and redemption spread far beyond the cobblestone streets where it all began. It became a tale told in homes, schools, and even royal courts, a reminder that even the fiercest among us can change when met with compassion instead of fear. Brutus, once feared as a weapon of aggression, found his true calling as a companion and protector. His days were now filled with joy rather than hostility. Alongside Captain Alaric, he patrolled the streets not to intimidate but to inspire confidence. People no longer shied away from him. Instead, they welcomed him warmly, often stopping to greet him or offer him treats. Children especially adored Brutus, their laughter ringing out whenever he playfully nudged them with his nose. For many, seeing Brutus trot happily beside Alaric was proof that even those burdened by harsh training could rediscover their natural kindness if given the chance. Marcus, too, underwent a transformation that surprised even himself. At first, working at the animal shelter felt like punishment, a daily reminder of his failure. But over time, he came to see it as an opportunity to rewrite his story. Every wagging tail and grateful bark taught him lessons about patience, responsibility, and unconditional love. He learned to recognize the pain behind anger, both in animals and in people, and realized how much healing could come from offering a helping hand rather than lashing out. Slowly but surely, Marcus began earning back the respect of his community, one small act of kindness at a time. The bond between Marcus and Brutus, however, remained complicated. Though Brutus had chosen Alaric as his new companion, Marcus still visited him occasionally, bringing along snacks or toys as gestures of goodwill. These visits weren't easy for Marcus. They stirred memories of his past mistakes, but they also reminded him of how far he'd come. Watching Brutus interact with Alaric, so full of loyalty and trust, inspired Marcus to keep moving forward. In a way, Brutus had become a bridge between two very different worlds, the life Marcus left behind and the future he was determined to build. For Alaric, the entire ordeal reinforced his belief in the power of understanding and forgiveness. He knew that justice didn't always mean punishment. It could also mean guiding someone toward a better path. By choosing mercy over retribution, he hadn't just changed Marcus's life. He had strengthened the ties within the community. Citizens who had once viewed the royal guards with suspicion now saw them as protectors who cared deeply about the well-being of everyone, even those who made mistakes. In the end, The legacy of that fateful day in the marketplace went far beyond a single confrontation. It sparked conversations about fairness, empathy, and second chances. Parents used the story to teach their children about the importance of treating others and animals with kindness. Teachers shared it in classrooms to illustrate the value of perseverance and growth. Even the monarchy took notice, using the incident as an example of how leadership should be rooted in compassion rather than authority alone. Years later, when Marcus stood before a group of troubled youth at the same animal shelter where he'd once served his sentence, he couldn't help but smile. "I used to think I was destined to fail," he admitted, looking around at the eager faces before him. "But then I learned something important, that we're not defined by our worst moments. We're defined by what we choose to do after them." As he spoke, Brutus sat quietly by his side, his presence a living testament to the truth of Marcus's words. What had started as a malicious plan ended as a lesson in humanity, a reminder that every action, no matter how misguided, holds the potential for redemption. And as long as there are people willing to extend a hand or a kind word, the cycle of anger and resentment can always give way to hope, healing, and connection. In the days that followed the incident in the marketplace, news of the thwarted attack spread like wildfire throughout the city. People couldn't stop talking about Captain Alaric's calm demeanor and the unexpected bond he had formed with Brutus. What began as a tense standoff quickly became a story of redemption, courage, and humanity, a tale that inspired both admiration and reflection. Yet while the public celebrated Alaric's heroics, Marcus found himself grappling with consequences far greater than he had anticipated. Marcus was brought before the magistrate, where his actions were scrutinized in detail. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Witnesses recounted how he had unleashed Brutus with clear intent to harm, and even Marcus himself admitted to his role in the plot during questioning. Facing severe punishment for his crime, Marcus braced himself for the worst. But instead of delivering a harsh sentence, the magistrate surprised everyone by deferring to Alaric's recommendation. After all, it was Alaric who had shown mercy at the scene. And now, it seemed, justice would follow suit. Alaric proposed an alternative to imprisonment or fines. Rather than punishing Marcus further, he suggested that the thug be given a chance to make amends through community service. Specifically, Alaric recommended that Marcus work at a local animal shelter, caring for stray dogs and other neglected animals. At first, Marcus balked at the idea. He had never considered himself particularly fond of animals, aside from Brutus, and the thought of spending hours cleaning kennels and feeding unruly strays seemed unbearable. But when Alaric explained the reasoning behind the suggestion, something shifted within him. "These animals are like mirrors," Alaric told Marcus during one of their conversations. "They reflect the care, or neglect, they receive. If you put effort into helping them heal, they'll trust you. And maybe, along the way, you'll find some healing for yourself too." His words struck a nerve. Marcus realized that much of his resentment stemmed from feeling abandoned and unvalued, feelings he had projected onto society, and ultimately, onto the royal guards. Perhaps working with animals could help him confront those emotions and begin rebuilding his life. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed to the arrangement. Over time, he discovered that tending to injured or frightened animals wasn't just about physical labor. It required patience, empathy, and understanding. Each dog he cared for reminded him of Brutus, strong yet vulnerable, capable of loyalty, but also scared by past mistreatment. As Marcus worked alongside shelter staff, learning how to mend broken bodies and spirits, he slowly began to see parallels between the animals' struggles and his own. Meanwhile, Brutus stayed by Alaric's side, becoming an unofficial mascot for the royal guards. During patrols, the once feared attack dog trotted happily beside the captain, earning affectionate pats from children and curious glances from adults. Some citizens initially worried that Brutus might revert to his aggressive tendencies, but Alaric assured them otherwise. "He's proven himself trustworthy," Alaric said simply. True to his word, Brutus remained gentle and obedient, his transformation serving as living proof that even the most hardened hearts can change. As weeks turned into months, Marcus started noticing subtle changes in himself. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. Helping animals recover gave him a renewed sense of hope, teaching him that compassion wasn't a weakness, it was strength. He began volunteering additional hours at the shelter, taking pride in seeing once neglected creatures thrive under his care. Word of his efforts reached the community, and though many still remembered his earlier transgressions, they couldn't deny the sincerity of his transformation. For Alaric, witnessing Marcus's progress was deeply rewarding. It reinforced his belief that people weren't defined solely by their mistakes. They were shaped by the choices they made afterward. By choosing forgiveness over vengeance, Alaric hadn't just spared Marcus. He had set into motion a ripple effect that touched countless lives. And as Brutus continued to win over hearts across the city, the bond between human and animal served as a powerful reminder of the connections that unite us all. In the end, what started as a malicious act of defiance blossomed into something far greater, a testament to second chances, resilience, and the enduring power of kindness. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, his face burning with shame as he watched Brutus remain steadfastly by Alaric's side. The crowd's laughter and applause rang in his ears like a cruel taunt, each cheer slicing deeper into his pride. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could his prized weapon, his loyal companion, betray him so completely? It was supposed to be a flawless plan, a moment of triumph that would expose the royal guards as weak and vulnerable. Instead, it had become a public spectacle that left him humiliated and defeated. Desperation clawed at Marcus as he shouted commands, his voice cracking with frustration. "Brutus, come here. Now." He waved his arms wildly, hoping to regain control of the situation. But Brutus ignored him entirely, his attention fixed solely on Alaric. The dog's tail wagged gently, a stark contrast to the aggression he had displayed moments earlier. To Marcus, it felt like a betrayal, not just from Brutus, but from fate itself. He lunged forward, determined to reclaim his dominance, but before he could take more than a few steps, two royal guards stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Stay where you are," one of them said firmly, their tone leaving no room for argument. Marcus froze, his chest heaving as he realized there was no escape. The weight of his failure crashed down on him, and for the first time, he felt truly powerless. As the guards closed in, Alaric rose to his feet, still keeping Brutus close by his side. The captain's expression was calm, almost serene, as though the entire ordeal had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Yet there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even compassion. Instead of handing Marcus over immediately, Alaric motioned for the guards to hold back. Then, stepping closer to the defeated thug, he spoke in a low, steady voice. "Why did you do this?" he asked, his tone devoid of anger or judgment. Marcus hesitated, caught off guard by the question. For weeks, he had convinced himself that his actions were justified, that the royal guards deserved to be humiliated for their arrogance and oppression. But now, standing face to face with Alaric, he found it hard to muster the same conviction. I wanted to show everyone," Marcus stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Show them that you're not untouchable, that you're just like the rest of us." His words trailed off as tears welled up in his eyes. He hadn't expected to feel this way, to be confronted not with hostility but with understanding. Alaric nodded slowly, as if considering Marcus's confession. Then, after a long pause, he replied, "I understand your anger. Believe me, I've seen how unfair life can be. But violence only breeds more violence. Is that really the legacy you want to leave behind?" The question struck a chord deep within Marcus. For years, he had allowed bitterness and resentment to consume him, shaping every decision he made. But now, faced with Alaric's quiet wisdom, he began to see the futility of his actions. What had he achieved by training Brutus to attack? Nothing but pain, for himself, for others, and even for the dog he claimed to care about. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, leaving him speechless. Alaric extended a hand toward Marcus, not as a gesture of superiority, but as an offer of reconciliation. "You don't have to live like this," he said softly. "There's another way. Let us help you find it." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Though he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he also knew that continuing down his current path would only lead to further destruction. As the guards escorted Marcus away, the crowd began to disperse, their murmurs filled with admiration for Alaric's handling of the situation. Few could recall ever seeing such grace under pressure, or such mercy extended to someone who clearly didn't deserve it. Meanwhile, Brutus remained faithfully at Alaric's side, his once menacing presence now transformed into something far gentler. Unbeknownst to anyone, this encounter marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Marcus and Brutus, but for the entire community. Sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won through force, but through acts of kindness that inspire change. As Brutus skidded to a halt mere feet away from Captain Alaric, the tension in the air was palpable. The crowd, frozen in shock, watched with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. Marcus, hidden behind the crates, clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mind raced. Why had Brutus stopped? This wasn't part of the plan. The dog should have been sinking his teeth into Alaric's flesh by now, not standing there as if confused or hesitant. Alaric, however, remained unfazed. Instead of drawing his sword or raising his arms defensively, he did something unexpected. He lowered himself onto one knee. It was a deliberate movement, slow and deliberate, as though he were approaching a wild animal rather than facing down a trained killer. With his free hand extended outward, palm open and facing upward, Alaric held Brutus's gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, no trace of panic, only calmness and control. To the onlookers, it seemed almost otherworldly, like witnessing some ancient ritual unfold before their very eyes. What they didn't know was that Alaric's actions weren't random. Years earlier, before rising to prominence among the royal guards, Alaric had served alongside military dogs during a brief stint in border security. He had learned firsthand how to read their body language, how to communicate without words, and most importantly, how to earn their trust. Dogs, he knew, responded not just to commands but also to energy, to the emotions radiating from those around them. And right now, Alaric exuded nothing but confidence and reassurance, two qualities that resonated deeply with even the fiercest of creatures. Brutus tilted his head slightly, his sharp eyes studying Alaric's face. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had slowed. The dog sniffed the air cautiously, his instincts battling against his training. On one hand, Marcus's harsh command still echoed in his ears, urging him to attack. On the other hand, Alaric's presence offered something different, something unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. It was as if Brutus could sense that this man posed no threat, that his intentions were rooted in understanding rather than aggression. Slowly, almost tentatively, Brutus took a step forward, then another. The growl that had once rumbled deep in his throat faded into silence, replaced by an almost curious demeanor. The crowd, which moments ago had been screaming in terror, now fell utterly silent, captivated by the surreal scene unfolding before them. Mothers held their children tighter, not out of fear but out of awe, while merchants leaned over their stalls, craning their necks for a better view. Even Marcus, who had been counting on chaos, found himself paralyzed by disbelief. When Brutus finally reached Alaric, he paused again, his nose twitching as he sniffed the captain's extended hand. Alaric didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply waited, his breathing steady and measured. After what felt like an eternity, Brutus gave a soft huff, a sound that carried neither hostility nor defiance, and sat down obediently at Alaric's side. The transformation was astonishing. Gone was the snarling beast that had charged through the marketplace moments earlier. In its place stood a calm, submissive creature, clearly recognizing Alaric as someone worthy of respect. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and overwhelming. Gasps of surprise turned into murmurs of admiration, followed by scattered applause. People began whispering to one another, marveling at the captain's composure and skill. "Did you see that?" one man exclaimed to his neighbor. "He didn't even raise a finger." Another woman shook her head in disbelief, saying, "I've never seen anything like it." Even the children, who had been frightened moments ago, now giggled excitedly, pointing at Brutus as if he were some kind of magical hero. For Marcus, however, the moment was anything but triumphant. As he stared at the scene unfolding before him, a wave of humiliation washed over him. His meticulously crafted plan had unraveled in seconds, leaving him exposed and powerless. Worse still, Brutus, the dog he had poured months of effort into training, was now sitting loyally beside the very man Marcus had sought to humiliate. It was a bitter irony, one that left him seething with anger and frustration. But beneath all that rage lay a flicker of doubt, a nagging question he couldn't ignore. How had Alaric done it? What secret power did this man possess that could turn even the fiercest adversary into an ally? As Brutus sat obediently at Captain Alaric's side, the marketplace fell into an eerie silence. The crowd, which had been buzzing with panic just moments before, now watched in stunned disbelief. It was as though they were witnessing something otherworldly, a battle of wills that ended not with violence but with understanding. For Marcus, hidden behind the crates, the scene was unbearable to watch. His carefully orchestrated plan had unraveled in seconds, leaving him exposed and humiliated. But for Alaric, this moment was an opportunity, an opening to turn chaos into connection. Alaric didn't waste any time. Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, he knelt down beside Brutus, speaking softly to the dog in a tone that carried both authority and warmth. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're safe here." To anyone else, it might have seemed like simple praise, but there was more to it than that. Alaric understood that Brutus wasn't just responding to commands. He was reacting to emotions. Fear, aggression, and confusion had driven the dog forward. But now, calmness and trust were pulling him back. Brutus tilted his head slightly, his sharp eyes studying Alaric's face. There was no hint of hostility in the captain's expression, only patience and sincerity. Slowly, almost tentatively, Brutus leaned closer, sniffing Alaric's outstretched hand. When Alaric gently scratched behind the dog's ears, Brutus let out a soft huff, a sound that carried none of the menace he'd displayed earlier. Instead, it was almost playful, as if the dog were relieved to finally find someone who spoke his language. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Gone was the snarling beast that had charged through the marketplace moments ago. In its place stood a calm, submissive creature, clearly recognizing Alaric as someone worthy of respect, and perhaps even affection. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Mothers held their children close, whispering stories about how heroes weren't always defined by swords or armor. Merchants stepped out from behind their stalls, clapping enthusiastically while exchanging awestruck glances. Even the children, who had been frightened moments earlier, now giggled excitedly, pointing at Brutus as though he were some kind of magical hero. But for Marcus, the moment was anything but triumphant. As he watched Brutus sit loyally beside Alaric, a wave of humiliation washed over him. His meticulously crafted plan had unraveled in seconds, leaving him exposed and powerless. Worse still, Brutus, the dog he had poured months of effort into training, was now sitting faithfully by the very man Marcus had sought to humiliate. It was a bitter irony, one that left him seething with anger and frustration. But beneath all that rage lay a flicker of doubt, a nagging question he couldn't ignore. How had Alaric done it? What Marcus failed to understand was that Alaric's success wasn't rooted in brute strength or intimidation. It was built on trust. Dogs like Brutus weren't machines programmed to follow orders blindly. They were intelligent, perceptive creatures capable of reading subtle cues and emotions. Alaric's calm demeanor and gentle approach had communicated something far more powerful than fear: safety, by showing Brutus that he posed no threat, and offering him a sense of security. Alaric had earned the dog's loyalty in a way Marcus never could. For the crowd, this revelation was nothing short of inspiring. They saw in Alaric not just a skilled leader, but a man who understood the value of compassion. It wasn't about dominance or control. It was about connection. And as Brutus wagged his tail contentedly, sitting proudly beside the captain, the message became clear. True strength lies not in force, but in the ability to inspire trust and respect. Yet for Marcus, the lesson was far more personal. Watching Brutus choose Alaric over him wasn't just humiliating, it was heartbreaking. He had spent months training the dog, shaping him into what he believed was the perfect weapon. But now, faced with the reality of Brutus's defection, Marcus realized something painful. He had never truly understood the dog. All those months of harsh commands and rigid discipline had created obedience, yes, but not loyalty. Loyalty required something deeper, something Marcus hadn't been willing or able to give. As the crowd continued to cheer, Marcus felt the weight of his failure pressing down on him. His plan had backfired spectacularly, exposing not just his own weaknesses, but also the flaws in his worldview. Violence and aggression had gotten him nowhere. Instead, it was kindness and understanding that had won the day. Though he didn't yet realize it, this moment would mark the beginning of a profound change within him, a shift toward a path he never thought possible.